Good afternoon. My name is John Kogut, and I'm with Benefits Officer Training and Development. And today we're going to talk about the Retirement Application Audit. What we're going to do, we're going to look at kind of the beginning of the audit, look at the case processing, so when it leaves HR and comes to OPM, the steps it takes. And also we're going to look at the, most common errors of the audit and kind of ways to improve accuracy. And so with that, when we say a healthy case, what we mean is a healthy retirement application package is one that's complete and not missing information, and it does not have to be developed for that information. So basically it comes to OPM and we can process the case and finalize the annuity for the retiree. So the application audit began in 2009. It was based on a six-week period of data, and it was done annually up until 2012. And prior to that, the data was collected from the claims examiners that were processing the cases. In 2012, the responsibility moved to the retirement development section. And this is where the SIRS and FERS checklist was created. And that was in 2012. And the customer service specialist used that in the retirement development section to review cases and determine if they were healthy or unhealthy. And also that is where then the data was taken for the application audit. And so in 2014, we expanded the error definitions. 'Cause prior to that, the definitions were kind of vague, and oftentimes we were using a miscellaneous, so it didn't cover all of the errors properly. So the definitions were expanded in 2014. We did send this information out in our listserv in October and November. We also had a YouTube webcast, tips on submitting a healthy retirement application, and that goes over the new error definitions as well as ways to improve on those errors. And then in 2015, we added one additional definition, which is the marriage certificate. That was prior to that, it was not required in all applications, but as of fiscal year 2015, it is now required for all individuals that are married and have a survivor annuity. So now we're kind of look at the purpose of the audit, and what that is it's used to improve accuracy and completeness of the agency retirement packages. Because the more packages we receive that are healthy, we can process those cases in a timely fashion and get annuitants into full retired pay. We also use our office, Benefits Officer Training and Development, to reach out to agencies to give them training and guidance on their common errors that we see and ways to improve upon those errors. It is also can be used by the HR, the headquarters benefits officer, to use training internally for whatever they see their components may need refreshers on. And it's also used for our strategic goal, and that strategic goal is what we call the 60-90, and that is to process 90% of our non-disability retirement applications in a 60-day time frame. So that is also what the audit is used for. And kind of throughout the audit process, we've set goals on what we want the completeness of packages. So I've just got two examples here. 2015, the goal was to have 85% of the retirement packages complete. That goal was met with an 87.5%. Then in fiscal year 2017, the goal was also 85, and we exceeded that goal with 90.8%. And for this year, for fiscal year 2018, the goal is still 85%. We kind of the data is now collected at the back end versus the front end, so just kind of a change in that. I didn't want to increase the percentage this year. Most likely we'll, depending on what the overall looks like at the overall actually looks like at the end of this fiscal year might up it for 2019. And here's just a snapshot of when the audit began in 2009. The baseline accuracy was 68.5%. And if you kind of look through each year, the accuracy rate continued to go up. We do see a little dip in 2014, and that was when we added the new error definitions to kind of capture the errors that we were seeing that were delaying case processing. But after that, in 2015, it went up, and it's continued to go up since then. So we are seeing an upward trend, which is a good thing. And here's a snapshot from 2015. It's just the quarterly breakdown. So quarter one, it was an 86.6%. And then the average of the four for fiscal year 2015 was 87.5%. And here is from fiscal year 2017, total cases reviewed was 41,237 cases. Of those cases, 3,791 had errors. And so that came to the accuracy rate of 90.8. So again, a great year. Now, we're going to take a look at kind of the outreach our office does to support the agency audit and guidance we can give to you. So the first we did is the Retirement Application Symposiums. That was January 2009 as well as November of 2012. We've also, since we brought back our spring and fall festivals, we've had a retirement application class in each one of those. So we're continuing to offer that, and we've also added a disability application processing class as well. We've also done a few webcasts, a healthy retirement package in October of 2012, and then in 2014 we did tips for submitting a healthy application package. Again, like I mentioned earlier, that goes over the new error definitions from 2014, and again, the most common errors at the time. They obviously have changed a little bit since then. And also, for the period while we were not doing our in-person conferences, we did some virtual seminars. And in November 2014 and July 2015, we went over a retirement application audit update. We've also, along with the virtual and in-person events, we've also submitted or published some BALs. So the first was BAL 12-103, which is submitting a healthy application package, and that came out in 2012. And that has the SIRS and FERS checklists that are used for the audit. So you have access to that. There are attachments, as well as the other attachment is the case processing or case order attachment. And then we also came out in 2012. 102 was the acceptance of photocopies of documents. And that goes into what documents we can accept photocopies of that we don't need the wet signature on. And there is also a memo in there that needs to be signed by the HR specialist that's certifying that the document that is a photocopy, but it came from an official source. And also, BAL 14-103, it is on submitting retirement FEHB benefits and kind of the documentation we need. And also, we created a memo that can be used if you don't have full documentation, or if there's something off with the documentation. For example, if they're under their spouse, you can submit the memo along with the spouse's 2809s to just kind of show and explain that they're under their spouse's FEHB program. We've also periodically, we haven't done so in a while, but had benefits officer meetings where we'll discuss error trends for the audit. And again, we've sent out some messages on our listserv as well. The 2012 error definitions, as well as then again for the update for 2014. And from our last webcast in 2014, we submitted the question and answer portion, sent that out through the webcast as well. And the other piece that we'll do, when I send out the monthly audit report to the headquarters level benefits officers, we will sometimes include job aids as well as most common errors and trends that we see, so that headquarters level can have that and they can determine how they need to send that to the rest of their HR specialists. And then finally, the last piece that we'll do, if time permitting and schedule, I've gone out to individual agencies to discuss their specific errors and trends that we see with the audit. And the most recent BAL we submitted, published, was the BAL 16102, and that is OPM is no longer accepting corrections on certain benefit election forms. And it does go through all of them. I listed just a few on the slide. Some of the main ones, the 2818 continuation of life insurance. There can be no scratch outs, whiteouts on that. The survivor annuity election form as well. That's another example. That these forms, they cannot have any scratch out, whiteouts, anything that you look at and may think that could be considered a scratch out. You definitely want to have the annuitant or retiree submit a new form so it doesn't delay the application process. And so kind of the importance of the audit, again, is to help us meet our 60/90 goal so we can process cases and get them finalized as quickly as possible for the annuitant. So we don't have to, again, which would delay the process if we have to develop for additional or missing information. Of course, there are instances where sometimes application is healthy, but we still have to go out for additional information. That's generally with deposits, redeposit letters. Another question I get often with the audit is, why do my audit results include cases that were submitted months ago? And that's due to, it's a few things. The cases are reviewed in the order we receive them in the retirement development section, and also with our new process where the cases are reviewed with the checklist in the retirement development section, but the data is not collected until the case is finalized in the annuity processing section. So that is creating a bit of a delay that you will see on the 2018 audit results, the monthly reports. So again, we're just kind of moved it there to have the annuity processing section submit the data to myself to then process for the report, just so we don't want to cause any delays in application processing. So that's why we've gone through this approach. And now with the audit, it is cases that are reviewed are all non-disability cases, except for deferred applications and direct submission. Because again, the agency is not submitting these to us, so you have no control over what is being submitted. That is strictly just the former employee that is submitting that documentation. And now if you read ahead, you'll see, why do reports have cases that I can't identify? And unfortunately, sometimes these deferred applications do end up on the audit report. It does not happen often, but unfortunately it does from time to time. And also the other issue may be if an incorrect submitting office number is put on the checklist, that could also cause a case to show up on your report that you can't identify. Now what we're going to do, we're kind of look at the case process. So once it leaves HR, the course it takes to get to OPM and then be finalized. So the first step is HR prepares the retirement application, generally 20 to 100 days prior to retirement. Upon separation, the final SF50 is cut and the retirement package is sent to your payroll shared service center. And from there, payroll service center will send what we call the information through the data exchange file. And that's several fields that populates our electronic system. And then from there, 2 days after that, they submit the actual package to OPM through overnight shipping. And again, this process, we've got some dates on there. Of course, it can vary depending on the payroll backlog at the time, how quickly they get the application out to us. And from there, once we receive the case, so a few things happen. The first is the data exchange populates our front-end system, and that's generally 55% of the time we are able to put the retiree into interim pay from there, because we get the health benefits information, life insurance, final salary, as well as their service history computation date. So 55% of the time, like I said, the cases are put into interim pay. And from there, if they're not, the next step is once we receive the case file, it's then put together in the retirement preparation section. And what they do is they assemble the case. This is where the case file is created. They will put any documents we've already received from if an employee had time at another agency. They will give us, we'll get copies of the former IRRs. If they have any military deposits paid in full, we will take that from either the physical record or from the electronic system and marry that with the case so we have all the information. And they will, in the retirement preparation section, if they weren't automatically put into interim pay, they will then put the retiree into interim pay. And this can take 5 to 7 days from receipt of the physical application package. Once the case is completed, it then goes to the retirement development section. And the retirement development section, this is where the audit data is first captured on the SIRS and FIRS checklist. They determine if a case is healthy or unhealthy. If the case is healthy, they then forward the case to the annuity processing section to process and calculate the retirement annuity. If the case is not healthy, they will initiate the development. And then that depends what type of information is missing. If it's a marriage certificate, they would go to the annuitant. If they're missing FEHB or life insurance forms, they'll go to HR. And of course, if any IRRs are missing, they would reach out to payroll. And they will hold the case until they receive the documentation. And then once they receive that documentation and they determine the case is then healthy, they will submit it to the annuity processing section. And from there, the next step is the annuity processing section. And here they will process the annuity. If they, as they go through the case, if they determine something was missed, they will send the case back to the retirement development section to get whatever is missing. This is also where if there's any election through deposits or redeposits, in other words, if they had excess deductions and they're going to roll them over, the annuity processing section sends these letters out to let the annuitant make a choice if they want to pay that deposit or not. And they will hold the case until they get that feedback. And again, like I said, if the case is healthy, they will adjudicate it. And once they adjudicate the case, the final step is for an auditor to review the case to make sure there were no errors in calculating the case. And if everything is good, they will finalize it, and the annuitant will receive their any back pay owe and their full monthly annuity. And here again, like I briefly mentioned, this is then, once the case is finalized, the customer service specialist will review the SIRS and FIRS checklist from the retirement development section and submit the audit data to the audit inbox, which I then use and to compile the monthly audit report. So again, to recap, the steps that it goes through, this all does, we've got estimated time frames, but it does depend on how quickly we receive the case file from payroll, and then also, depending on the time of year, if we're in a surge or not, how quickly we process the case. So again, it is all dependent on workflow, on how quickly we can get these cases finalized. So that's kind of the case path process. What we're going to look at next is the common errors, the most common errors of 2017, and kind of ways to improve on those errors. And so here are the top 5. The most common error of 2017 was the SF 2818, and it was the election exceeded the coverage, and that was 16% of our errors, followed by FEHB coverage, not having the 5 years of documentation at 13%, followed by the marriage certificate not being submitted with the application, and then the unacceptable corrections, and then finally the FICA pay rates were not submitted or they were incomplete. And so again, we are going to look at these top 5 errors more closely and kind of look at ways to improve upon submission. So the first is the 2818, and that is the elected coverage exceeds the permitted coverage. So the example would be the employee elects to continue 4 multiples of option B, but they are only allowed to continue 3. The other that falls under this category is if they elect to not enrolled or not continuing coverage when they were not enrolled. That's another error that falls under that, or vice versa in that. Some of the other common errors we see with the 2818, the 2818 is missing or it is not signed by the annuitant. So some ways to improve that really is to review that 2818 before you submit the application package. Just make sure that they've signed and dated the form, that they're not trying to continue coverage that they don't have. Another way to double check would be just to review the 2817s that you have and look through the OPF just to make sure that you didn't miss anything. And again, just really let the employee know that we need the document submitted correctly because it will delay the claim processing, because what we'll have to then do if we get an incorrect form is we'll have to send it out to the annuitant to have them complete the form correctly. And so now we're going to look at the second most common error, which is the FEHB, and that is we did not receive the 5 years of coverage. So ideally, we would like all the employee's entire career documentation, 2809s, 2810s, if you have them, but we only need the 5 years preceding retirement. The reason we like all of them is that helps later on. If there's a survivor claim, if we have all the documents, we don't have to potentially request anything or go and obtain the OPF to get any additional forms, just to verify dependents or survivor. And so that's why we like all of that. And again, acceptable proof is the 2809s, the 2810s. We can also accept online service, FHB fact sheets, history from your online systems, as long as it has the old plan, the new plan, and the effective dates. We do need all of that. If we don't have that, that online printout will not be sufficient. Also, if the retiring employee is under their spouse's plan, we would need those 2809s to verify that they are a covered dependent. Or if they're under TRICARE, we need the uniform service card, whether it's theirs or their spouse's, as well as CHAMP VA. We would need the CHAMP VA A card or the spouse's, just so we have proof that they are covered. And also another thing, if the retiring employee is under TRICARE and they're over 65, we also need the copies of Medicare A and B to verify that they are enrolled in that to continue TRICARE. And again, BAL 14103 covers acceptable documentation for FEHB coverage continuing into retirement. And also it provides the memo, which can be used if the documentation is not complete, or like I mentioned earlier, if the documentation is missing, if it's missing, or if they're under a family's FEHB, and just to kind of make it clear for the claims examiner when they're reviewing that to know that they are under a spouse's plan. And with that, this is what the form looks like. Again, it's got the new plan, old plan, effective dates, and the source where you got that information from. So 2809, online printout screen, whatever it may be. And then you also want to sign and date that to certify the document is official. And this slide here, I do want to mention that it says that the certification memo is required in all cases. That was an error on my part. That is not the case. If you have the documentation to show the 5 years, or if all the documentation was submitted, we do not need that certification memo in addition. It is only if you don't have the 5 years of documentation. And again, just to reiterate that we will take a screenshot or the printout from your system as long as it shows the 5 years of coverage as well as the old plan, new plan, and any effective dates that may have happened. And so now we're going to look at the third most common error, which is the marriage certificate not being included with the application. And we have to have that if the retiree is electing to provide a survivor annuity. If the marriage certificate is not there, it will delay the claim, and we will have to reach out to the annuitant to obtain that. And it can be a copy of the marriage certificate. So some ways to improve that would just be ensure that all retiring employees submit their marriage certificate. If it's a common law marriage, they need to submit some affidavits or any other documentation that shows that they are in a common law marriage. Just some proof that they present themselves as a married couple. And then the other thing is not all states do recognize common law marriage. So it has to be a state that recognizes common law marriage. Another issue that we see is if the marriage certificate is in a foreign language, we do need that to be translated. That can be done at the embassy. So, for example, if the marriage certificate's in Italian, they could go to the Italian embassy to get that translated. Department of State or any other services that translate documents. And again, just ensure that the employee is filling out their application correctly and putting any marriage information that they have on there, so it doesn't cause an error or delay the retirement application. The fourth most common is the unacceptable corrections. Again, we do not accept any scratch out, white outs, or anything like that. We need it to be a clean document. And again, I just put on here a few, the most common forms we see that on, but again, the BAL does list every single document that we cannot accept scratch outs on. And again, the big one is the 2818, as well as the application under the spousal section, as well as the spousal consent form. We cannot have any whiteouts or scratch outs on that. And again, just to reiterate, BAL 16102 has that information, so you can review. And again, if the annuitant doesn't want, if you go out to the annuitant and retiree annuitant that they don't want to fill out the document again, you just have to let them know that if they don't, once the form gets to OPM, the application package, we will withhold the full annuity. We won't process it until we get a clean document. So that's best advice to give for unacceptable corrections. We can't have them. We'll request a new form, whether it's at HR level or OPM. We're going to need a clean form. And then the final error is the FICA pay rates. And again, this is the FICA earnings or pay rates are not included on the certified summary or they're incomplete. We do need all of those listed if they have a deposit that they did not pay off, or if it's for FERS prior to 1/1/89. And again, for postal, we need FICA earnings for FERS if the appointment was 3 months or longer. And some ways to review to catch these errors really is just to go through the OPF to make sure you're not missing any FICA service or redeposit service. You can reach out. You can check the data viewer to see if there's any documentation in there that shows that maybe they already pay their redeposits. If there's any information of FICA in there, and then also just ask the employee to see if they recall. If anything's missing is you don't have to ask the employee to see if they recall doing any non-deduction service or if they had a redeposit. And with that, we're going to open it up to questions. So please submit any questions to benefits@opm.gov and just address agency audit webcast.
Okay, first question. There seems to be an issue with documents not being received even though they are sent in the package, as we keep copies of the package for each retirement. We get dinged for documents that are supposed to be missing, but when we check our records, we sent them, but our rating is not changed. Are there any plans for Boyers to review the processes that are currently in place for receiving documents?
Actually, and yes, I think part of that is, like I said, to the new learning curve for the customer specialists in the annuity processing section that have, as of the beginning of 2018, have now started handling the the audit data collection, and also I'm planning to have a meeting in the next month or so with the supervisor of that department to kind of go over feedback that I'm hearing from the agencies on these types of issues where you're submitting documentation, but it's somehow being missed and said it's not there. So that is something that we are working on, and I've sent most recently from the most recent monthly report some feedback that I received specifically about this. I think the issue was marriage certificates that were submitted, but they were counted as an error. Sent that to the department so they can review it themselves and also, give feedback to the customer service specialists that are reviewing these cases to cut down on these types of errors and issues that we've been seeing, or the documents being there but counting as an error.
Okay, the next one is a three-parter. First part, on the 2818, if the employee elected coverage during the 2016 open season and is thus not eligible to continue, in other words, they have less than 5 years, does the employee mark yes or no when asked if they want to continue? We know agencies identify on the agency checklist what coverage can be continued. How does the agency identify what coverage cannot be continued and why? That's the first part.
I'm going to have to double check on that. My understanding would be that it would be no, because they are not eligible to continue, but I will do additional research and send that response out through the listserv.
Okay, the second part deals with insurable interest. The medical statement from the employee. Is the agency responsible for validating if the statement defines good and healthy? As far as the employee goes, if the statement has an indication that may not be, will OPM provide written determination to the employee to deny the insurable interest?
That would not be through you. We would look at that. We generally send that through our disability department to verify that if the healthy enough to be acceptable for insurable interest.
And the final part of that, what color ink is acceptable on the forms? Blue and black only?
I would go with blue and black. That's a question I've never gotten. That's something I can double check on. But my understanding with any type of form, whether it's federal or state, I've always used blue or black. So that's one we'll double check and can send that out on the listserv as well. I think what we'll do is send similar to the last webcast kind of Q&A to anything that we don't get to today or we have to clarify. Next question.
Okay. How can we, HR benefit specialists, ensure we are receiving the OPM audit reports for our agency to know where the mistakes are and learn to correct them? I've inquired with our main head office, and they have not been able to get an answer of who is receiving them so they can be distributed.
So what I do is I send that out to the headquarters benefits officer that we have listed on our benefits officer website at OPM. So if you're an agency that, if the benefits officer is incorrect, you'll want to let us know, and you can let us know at benefits@opm.gov. Because kind of what I do, I just send it to the headquarters benefits officer, because if I were to send it to every HR specialist that requested, I just wouldn't have time to get through all those requests. So we send it to the headquarters benefits officer, and then they determine how they want to submit it or disseminate the information to the rest of the agency or subcomponents.
Okay. We have a question. I'm going to kind of summarize it for you. I have an employee that submitted a retirement package for processing that did not provide a copy of her marriage certificate. She elected a surviving spouse benefit. I sent her a letter informing her that I'm still waiting on the copy of the marriage certificate. She's not responded yet. She left May 11th, so it's been over a month now. Should I hold her package until I receive the marriage certificate, or should I send it forward to OPM?
You are not going to want to hold that application if they've already retired. You're going to want to send that to us. Unfortunately, it will be an error, but you do not want to hold that application, especially if they've been retired for that long, because I know there is the agent separation report that does go to Congress. So in this case, you've done all you can. I would submit that to us, and now that's for us to deal with, and we will reach out to her to get it. And if we don't, that may be something where we have to suspend the interim pay until we receive that.
Okay, give me just a second here. That is a little off topic. Okay, just a second. Okay. When we receive the error reports, we find that some of the errors aren't actually errors. Is there a dispute process? If OPM is reporting errors that truly aren't errors, then how do we deal with that?
Unfortunately, at this time, we are not changing the error reports that we send out. We do not have the staff to go through all the disputes and change each monthly error report. What I do is I do receive monthly from headquarters benefits officers what they're disputing, and I keep a folder for that, and I have been submitting some of those to the supervisor at the annuity processing section, and that's also something that when we have the meeting we're going to talk about. I know, again, because we're not getting any additional staff, that we're not going to be changing those reports, but I am giving them feedback, so kind of to improve upon, so we can cut down on those errors that we do make.
Okay. Please clarify, is the current OPM retirement processing accuracy percentage 85% or 90%?
So for fiscal year 2017, it was 90.8%. That 85 was the goal. So I haven't run the numbers yet. I will most likely get to it. I might do mid-year, but I'll most likely just wait till the end of the fiscal year to calculate what the yearly is for 2018. But the goal, so I guess just the goal, we'd like to see it be at least 85%. But again, 2017, the overall accuracy rate was 90.8.
Okay. Where can I find a current OPM retirement package checklist?
The checklist, I know, were sent out in November of 2014. So if you don't have access to that, I'm sure that's something we can submit again on the listserv, the most recent checklist. I know BL 12103 has the kind of the outline of the checklist. It's the old one. We have added new definitions. Also, the webcast tips for submitting a healthy retirement application package does go over the new. So if you need something immediately, you can look at that webcast. It is on YouTube. Again, it was April 2014, and it does go over the new error definitions that were added in 2014. So that's just in the meantime. And again, I think that's something we can put out on the listserv again, the most up to date. And again, the only difference in 2015 was we just added that the marriage certificate is required.
Okay. We have a question regarding the audit. We have seen that we were charged an error for FICA service and missing pay rates. However, in the case in question, FICA service was after 12/31/1988. That service isn't creditable under FERS, therefore we don't include the salary info. Can you confirm that we do not need to include salary rates for FICA service after 12/31/1988?
Yes, that was clearly an error on our part, because if If it's after 12/31/88 and it's not any of those special provisions where they can receive credit for it, there would be no point to submit the salary rates for a service they cannot pay a deposit to get credit for.
Okay. Are you doing any audit work on packages that include divorces, on acceptability of documents, and what is really needed to get these processed faster? For example, I'm hearing agencies are not requiring certified copies of divorce decrees or court orders.
At this time, that is not something that they're looking at in the checklist for the application audit.
Okay, let's see. Could you please go over this was regarding FEHB. Could you please go over the 5-year rule and break in service? If an employee was covered for 4 years, had a break, and then was reinstated and had 1 year of coverage before retirement, is this still acceptable?
Okay, so let me just understand. So they had 4 years, they left service, came back
For another year.
For another year. So they had it continuously the whole time they were employed. Yes, that would cover them.
Okay, give me a second here. Okay. I received an FEHB copy from the health carrier since it was missing from the employee's EOPF, but the employee's spousal information is incorrect and shows the spouse on the application. Will this be a problem when the employee retires? Example, are you married? Question states no, but it should be yes. The application lists the employee's spouse on the form, and the coverage is self and family.
Could you repeat? So
Sure.
Okay.
So they received an FEHB copy from the health benefit carrier since it was missing, but the employee's spousal information is incorrect, but shows the spouse on the application. So I'm assuming what they're asking is the spouse's information is incorrect on the report that they got from the carrier, even though they're showing self and family coverage.
That should not be an issue.
Okay. Would you please reiterate when we need to provide proof of TRICARE or CHAMP VA coverage in a retirement application package?
That would be if they are, well, I guess if they're going to be suspending their FEHB at retirement for TRICARE or CHAMP VA, or if they are under their spouse's or family member's plan, we would need that documentation of the spouse or family member to show that they're covered under TRICARE. Or again, if they themselves are suspending at retirement, then most likely what we will do is when we have that documentation, we will reach out to them and send them the RI 79-9.
Okay, let's see. I'm going to skip over that one. 5-year verification. BAL 14103 states we can use online systems to document coverage for FEHB if it shows the old coverage, new coverage, and effective date. We are being charged with errors when providing the above documents. So I guess they're asking, should this be happening?
No, that should not be happening. I have not seen anything to state that we've stopped accepting that documentation. That's just some, I guess, additional feedback when I have the meeting with the annuity process section that collects the data that we can go over to let them know that we're still accepting that.
Okay. Okay, give me just a second here. Okay, that's not really an audit question. Okay. Is it acceptable if applications are completed in different colored ink and/or half-typed and half-written if there are no edits or corrections otherwise?
I'm going to have to double check on that one. I would think not, but I don't want to tell you something to be wrong. So that's something I'll look into, and we'll put that on a listserv.
Okay, let's see. Okay. Documentation of 5 years on FEHB again. If we include all FEHB forms on file and we have continuity of coverage reflected for the last 5 years prior to retirement, will agencies get an error if the FEHB documents go beyond the 5 years, don't show from to FEHB information chronologically due to open season plan, name, code changes not captured on the FEHB documents?
So I guess to understand that you're submitting everything, but there's missing forms. That
If the FEHB documents beyond the 5 years don't show from and to FEHB information chronologically due to the open season plan name change codes not captured on the FEHB documents. So I guess if the plan changes their code mid-season.
Oh, okay. That may be something there. Just to, obviously without looking at all of it, to determine if how confusing it may be. That may be something where you want to submit that memo from BAL 14103 and just kind of put on there the questionable periods. Maybe just put on there, that the code was dropped and they were placed in this other code because it was no longer covered as an FEHB plan. You can put that on there and then put the source and sign it just so it's clear to the specialist.
Okay. Okay, if HR does not get a marriage certificate from the retiree, can HR include a memo for the record with the retirement case saying that we attempted to get the marriage certificate before the employee retired so the agency is not cited in error?
You can submit that, but my understanding is that will since it's not there and it's an unhealthy case, it will still be charged as an error. But you can submit that just to let the development team know that you've already attempted to get it.
Okay, I think you already addressed this in the presentation, but I'm going to read it again. For a long time, we've included an FEHB transfer memo that includes the current plan address, date of transfer. We include that along with the 5 or more years of FEHB elections. Do we still need to include this memo?
My understanding is no, that memo does not still need to be included as long as we have the 5-year documentation.
Okay. If I say no to basic life insurance, do I still have to mark for A, B, and C? Can I type initials on the survivor annuity election, or does it have to be pen and ink?
I would, so if you're electing no for basic, I would just fill out the rest of the boxes just to make sure that nothing is missed and it causes an error, even though obviously without basic life insurance you can't continue A, B, or C. And then what was the second part of the question?
Can they type in the initials, or do they have to be pen and ink?
For the survivor section, I would do ink just to be safe.
Okay. Is the audit presentation recorded, and can it be viewed later?
Yes, it will go on YouTube.
Okay, let's see. Okay. Regarding the FICA salary details, we are told by OPM previously that we needed to list FICA salary details even if a deposit was already paid in full. Reading the slides today, it appears that we only need to list the FICA salary details if the deposit is unpaid. Can you please confirm that this is the case?
That is my understanding, but if you've heard other guidance, I will do additional research, and that's something that I will add to the Q&A we put out on the listserv.
Okay, this is the second time this question has come up, so it's not directly related, but it's indirectly related. Are there any plans to use electronic signatures in the future, or possibly electronic submissions of a retirement package to expedite the adjudication process?
It's a possibility, but not at this time that I'm aware of.
Okay, let's see. Okay, that's a repeat. Okay. Should the 2818 be done if the employee does not have FEGLI? I've always submitted one indicating no, and written employee did not have basic FEGLI on the form, and had the employee sign it as I don't want the package to be held up because OPM is looking for the 2818. Should I continue this process or not bother with the 2818?
If they do not have FEGLI coverage, you do not need to submit that. I would submit the most recent 2817 showing that they did not elect coverage. And if they don't have it, they do not need to fill out the 2818.
Okay. Employees who elect to retire without giving the agency notice, who are covered by their spouse's federal FEHB, and the spouse works for a different agency, does not allow the employing agency time to obtain the 2809 reflecting the coverage. The carriers will not release the insurance information to the employing agency. They say that OPM must make contact with the carrier and request the insurance information. How do we not get charged with an error for this?
That's okay. I'm trying to think the best. That's, I mean, so I'm just understanding the question that they're under their spouse's plan, they're retiring, but you can't obtain any documentation to verify that. We're going to need some type of documentation. If not, it will be an error because then we will have to develop for that information.
Okay. This kind of parallels that a little bit. It's a little bit more direct. If a spouse has been covered under the other spouse who is now a federal retiree, what documentation is required from the employee when submitting the application to OPM for processing? Is the CSA number of the spouse carrying the coverage sufficient?
So just yes. So if they are retiring and they're under their spouse's plan who is already an annuitant, yes, generally name, CSA number, something so we can verify and look in their case for the FEHB documents.
Okay, to clarify, we only need to submit marriage certificate if the employee is selecting a survivor election?
Yes. If they're not married, obviously they wouldn't have one, or if they've have the spousal consent form, it is not required.
Okay.
And I should say, providing no survivor annuity. If they're partial, you'll want to submit that as well.
Okay. If the employee has prior FICA service that is creditable for retirement purposes and intends to pay the deposit with OPM when they retire, would we want to submit the 3108 form along with the employee's retirement application?
So they've not sent that in already or established anything. No, you do not need to send that because the claims examiner, when they're processing the case, will calculate the amount of the deposit and send a letter, either send a letter or contact the annuitant over the phone to see if they want to pay that.
Okay. Will OPM charge an error if the Schedule A, B, and C form is not provided when the employee does not have military service, is not military retired, and never filed any OWCP claims? According to the form instructions, the form is not applicable in this situation. We were previously advised by OPM that the Schedule A, B, and C is required even if not applicable, and the employee should complete their name, date of birth, social security number in the first section, then sign and date the bottom. Is this correct?
Yes, I would continue doing that guidance because if we don't receive it, we don't know if they do or do not have had prior military service or an OWCP claim. So they should submit those and just check no and sign the documents. In regards to marriage certificates and translators, is it always necessary that a translated copy be sent? In the past, we've not had to do this. Yes, we do need it translated, because if it's not translated, we may not understand what it says, and we would then have to reach out for that. So it would be an error.
Okay. In the case where another agency has not documented FEHB coverage in the case of a transferred employee, is it also permissible to use proof of coverage provided by the insurance company via a letter of coverage to augment the spotty insurance documentation?
So I guess is if the letter shows the prior plan and the new plan and dates, if all that's covered, that should not be an issue.
Okay.
So I guess I should say, from my experience when I was claims processor, we were able to call the carrier and they were able to give us the information. Say John Doe was in Blue Cross Blue Shield from such and such a date, and then change plans. They would give us that information, and we would take that as a report of contact over the phone. So, I mean, even if you can do that and submit that, again, we just need the documentation to show the old plan, new plan, and effective dates.
Does OPM require that payroll sign the SF-1150s with a hard copy signature, or will OPM accept an electronic signature?
We do not accept electronic signatures.
Let's see. If we get a faxed copy of the 2818 and verify everything is correct, will you still require a follow-up with the original?
I would check BAL 12102. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it does on their list every form that we could take a photocopy of.
Okay, you've already answered this one. Let's see. Okay. Is there a recommended timeline, the retiree signature date of the application, i.e. retired 12/31/18, and the date of the application is June 2018? I guess they're asking how long from the time the person fills it out until the time they actually retire.
Generally, we would like that within a year. From when they sign that form, within a year. If it's after a year, we would want it's kind of stale dated, and we want a new form with a new signature. Okay. Looks to be that's it for the questions now. So we don't get anything in another minute or two. That will conclude the webcast today. And like I said, anything that wasn't clear, I'll send out a Q&A on the listserv, and any questions that might come in later today that weren't answered, I will add those to the Q&A as well. All right, that looks like that's it. So thank you for watching the agency application webcast today.